Admiral Vextar stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, watching the stars stretch into lines as his massive fleet prepared to drop out of hyperspace. His black scales caught the light from the ship's displays, each one polished to mirror brightness. Around him, his crew worked at their stations with the calm confidence of those who had never known defeat. The Eternal Dominion was more than just a ship. It was a symbol of Zephyrian power, stretching over 8 kilometers from bow to stern. Its hull gleamed with the same dark metal that had conquered 400 worlds. Energy shields that could stop planet-killing weapons hummed quietly around the massive vessel. Plasma cannons capable of melting mountains lined its sides like the teeth of some ancient beast. But the Eternal Dominion was not alone. Behind it followed 200 of the Empire's finest warships, each one a masterpiece of destruction. The combined firepower of this fleet could turn entire worlds to glass. It was the largest force the Empire had assembled in 50 years, all for one simple mission: the complete destruction of humanity. Vextar walked slowly around his command chair, his taloned feet clicking against the metal deck. He had read the intelligence reports 3 times, and each reading made him more amused. Humans were a young species, barely crawling out of their home system. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel 20 years ago. Their largest ships were tiny compared to even the Empire's smallest vessels. It would hardly be a fair fight. But fairness was not the point. Admiral, called his communications officer, a young Zephyrian whose scales still held the bright green of youth. Fleet Admiral Zekthara wishes to address the fleet. Vextar nodded and moved to his command chair. The main display flickered to life, showing the weathered face of Fleet Admiral Zekthara. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship Starcrusher bustled with activity. Zekthara's scales had turned the deep purple of age and wisdom, and scars from a dozen campaigns marked his face. "Warriors of the Empire," Zekthara began, his voice carrying clearly across all 200 ships. "Today we face an enemy so weak that calling them an enemy seems almost insulting. The humans are nothing more than barely evolved apes who have learned to build metal shells around themselves." Laughter rippled across the bridge of the Eternal Dominion. Vextar allowed himself a small smile. Zekthara was right, of course. The humans had no idea what real war looked like. Our sensors show that their largest vessel is less than 2 kilometers long. Zekthara continued. Their weapons are primitive chemical rockets and simple energy beams. Their armor is basic metal alloys that our youngest cadets could punch through with training weapons. More laughter from the crew. Vextar's tactical officer, Commander Thexka, leaned over to whisper, "Sir, should we even bother charging our main weapons? It seems like overkill." Vextar considered this. The Empire's plasma cannons were designed to fight ships of equal size and power. Using them against human vessels would be like using a sword to swat flies. But then again, the point was not efficiency. The point was to send a message to every other species in the galaxy. "Our intelligence reports that humans reproduce quickly and spread fast," Zekthara was saying. "If we allow them to continue expanding, they might become a minor annoyance in a few hundred years. Better to crush them now while they are still weak. Think of this as pest control on a galactic scale." The fleet admiral's image shifted as he gestured to something off-screen. "The humans have built some orbital platforms around their home world. Our analysts estimate it would take us approximately 15 minutes to destroy all of their defenses. After that, we will demand their complete surrender. Any species that refuses will be eliminated." Vextar nodded approvingly. This was how the Empire had always operated. Show overwhelming force, demand submission, and destroy those who refused. It had worked on 400 worlds. It would work on this one too. "Remember," Zekthara concluded, "we are not just conquering another world today. We are making a statement. Every species watching will see what happens to those who think they can expand without the Empire's permission. Every rebel will see what awaits those who oppose us. Every potential enemy will think twice before challenging Zephyrian might." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in satisfied silence. Vextar looked around at his crew and felt the familiar surge of pride that came before a victory. These were the finest warriors in the galaxy, trained from birth to serve the Empire. They had never known defeat because defeat was impossible. "Navigation. Report," Vextar ordered. "We will drop out of hyperspace at the edge of the human system in 30 minutes, Admiral," came the crisp reply. "All ships report ready for combat operations. Weapon status? All plasma batteries charged and ready. Particle beam arrays online. Quantum torpedo tubes loaded. Shields at maximum power." Vextar settled back in his command chair and activated his personal display. The tactical information scrolled past in neat columns of data. 200 Zephyrian warships against perhaps 50 human vessels. The largest human ship was barely a quarter the size of the Eternal Dominion. The humans had no energy shields, no plasma weapons, no quantum drives. It would be a massacre. His tactical officer approached with a data pad. "Sir, the battle plan has been finalized. We will emerge in standard intimidation formation. The humans will see our full strength immediately. Fleet Admiral Zekthara estimates they will surrender within 10 minutes of our arrival." "And if they don't surrender?" Vextar asked, though he already knew the answer. "Then we destroy their orbital defenses and bombard their major cities until they do. Standard procedure, sir." Vextar accepted the datapad and reviewed the plan one final time. It was simple, efficient, and overwhelming. The humans would have no choice but to submit. Those who lived would become slaves of the Empire. Their worlds would provide resources for Zephyrian expansion. Their young would be taken and trained as servants. This was the natural order of things. The strong ruled the weak. The Empire was strong. Humanity was weak. 5 minutes to drop out, Admiral," announced the navigation officer. Vextar stood and walked to the main viewing port. Soon he would see the human star system spread out before him. He wondered if the humans even knew they were coming. Their primitive sensors probably couldn't detect ships in hyperspace. They might not realize what was happening until it was too late to matter. "All ships report ready for combat," came another announcement. Vextar smiled, showing his razor-sharp teeth. In a few hours, humanity would be nothing more than another entry in the Empire's long list of conquered species. Their primitive civilization would be remembered only as a cautionary tale about what happened to those who tried to expand without permission. The stars began to slow as the fleet prepared to return to normal space. Vextar gripped the rail of the viewing port and prepared to witness the Empire's latest victory. He had no idea that in a few short hours, everything he believed about Zephyrian superiority would be nothing more than drifting debris in the cold darkness of space. The Zephyrian fleet dropped out of hyperspace like a plague of metal locusts descending on the edge of the Sol system. 200 warships materialized in perfect formation, their dark hulls reflecting the distant light of Earth's sun. The Eternal Dominion took point position, its massive bulk dwarfing even the largest vessels in the fleet. Admiral Vextar watched the tactical display update as his sensors swept the system. The results were exactly what he had expected. Several small human vessels were fleeing toward the inner planets, their primitive engines leaving bright exhaust trails that his sensors could track from millions of kilometers away. The humans were running like frightened prey animals, just as they should. "Contact," reported his sensor officer. "Multiple human vessels detected. Largest appears to be approximately 1.8 kilometers in length. They are fleeing toward their homeworld." Vextar nodded with satisfaction. The intelligence reports had been accurate. The largest human ships were barely larger than his scout vessels. This would be even easier than he had anticipated. "Deploy the fleet in standard intimidation formation," he commanded. "I want them to see exactly what they are facing." Across the void, 200 Zephyrian warships spread out in a massive wall of firepower. Each vessel locked its weapons on the fleeing human ships while maintaining perfect spacing. The formation was designed to break enemy morale before the first shot was fired. Any species looking at this display of raw power would immediately understand the futility of resistance. Fleet Admiral Zekthara's voice crackled over the communication system. "All ships, this is Starcrusher. Maintain formation and prepare for standard pacification protocols. Remember, we want survivors to serve as examples to other species." Vextar activated his communication array and prepared to deliver the Empire's standard surrender demand. He had given this speech dozens of times to dozens of different species. The words always had the same effect. Terror, followed by immediate submission. "Open a channel to the human homeworld," he ordered. "Channel open. Admiral." Vextar straightened in his command chair and put on his most intimidating expression. His voice carried the authority of 4 centuries of conquest as he spoke in the broken English that Imperial translators had provided. "Primitive species of Terra," he began. "You are now subjects of the Zephyrian Empire. Your expansion into space without Imperial permission is a violation of galactic law. Surrender your fleets immediately and submit to Imperial rule or face total annihilation. You have 1 standard hour to respond." He cut the transmission and settled back to wait. 1 hour was more than generous. Most species surrendered within minutes of seeing the Imperial fleet. The smart ones anyway. But instead of coming from the fleeing human ships or from the planet Earth, the response came from empty space near the large gas giant that humans called Jupiter. The voice was calm, measured, and spoke in perfect galactic standard without any trace of fear. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the UNSC Retribution. You have 30 seconds to reverse course and leave the system immediately. This is your only warning." The bridge of the Eternal Dominion fell silent for a moment before erupting in laughter. Vextar's tactical officer was laughing so hard that tears were running down his scaled face. Even the usually serious weapons officer was grinning widely. "Sir," gasped the sensor officer between chuckles, "our scans show nothing but empty space where that transmission originated. There are no ships, no stations, nothing at all." Vextar smiled coldly. "So the humans thought they could use psychological warfare. Some species tried this when faced with Imperial might. They would send false transmissions from hidden locations, hoping to confuse or intimidate their enemies. It never worked, but he admired their creativity. "Ignore the transmission," he ordered. "It's obviously some primitive attempt to make us think they have hidden forces. Maintain course toward their homeworld." The laughter on the bridge gradually died down as the crew returned to their duties. Vextar watched the tactical display as his fleet moved deeper into the human system. The fleeing human vessels were still running, their engines burning at maximum power. None of them had turned to fight. None of them had even tried to respond to his surrender demand. 20 seconds remaining, announced his communications officer with obvious amusement. "Should we be afraid, Admiral?" More laughter rippled around the bridge. Vextar allowed himself to enjoy the moment. In a few hours, this would all be over. The human species would be another conquered people, and the Empire would be stronger than ever. 15 seconds, called another officer. Vextar looked out the main viewing port at the small blue and green world that was humanity's home. Soon Imperial ships would be in orbit around that planet. Soon human cities would bow before Zephyrian might. Soon this entire system would belong to the Empire. 10 seconds. He wondered what the humans were thinking right now. Were they panicking? Were they trying to evacuate their planet? Were they praying to whatever primitive gods they worshipped? It didn't matter. The outcome was already decided. 5 seconds. Vextar gripped the armrests of his command chair and prepared for whatever pathetic surprise the humans thought they could spring. Maybe they would fire a few primitive missiles. Maybe they would activate some kind of communication jamming. Maybe they would just surrender and save everyone the trouble. "Time," announced the communications officer. For a moment, nothing happened. The human system remained exactly as it had been. No hidden fleets appeared. No secret weapons activated. No mysterious forces emerged from the void. Just the same empty space that had been there all along. Then space itself began to change. Near the gas giant Jupiter, reality seemed to shimmer and bend. At first, it looked like a heat distortion, the kind that might appear over a hot metal surface. But this distortion was in the vacuum of space, and it was growing larger. "Admiral," called the sensor officer, his voice suddenly serious. "We're detecting some kind of spatial anomaly near the fourth planet." Vextar leaned forward in his chair. The distortion was definitely getting bigger, twisting and writhing like a living thing. His sensors were having trouble getting clear readings, as if space itself was interfering with their operation. "What kind of anomaly?" he demanded. "Unknown, sir. The readings don't match anything in our database. It appears to be some kind of dimensional distortion, but our science division says that's impossible with current technology." The distortion continued to grow, spreading across several thousand kilometers of space. Whatever was happening, it was big. Much bigger than anything the humans should have been capable of creating. "Could it be a weapon?" asked his tactical officer. Vextar studied the readings carefully. "Maintain course," he ordered. "It's probably some kind of defensive measure. A holographic projection or sensor jamming system. The humans are desperate, so they're trying anything they can think of." But even as he spoke the words, Vextar felt a cold thread of doubt creeping into his mind. The spatial distortion was unlike anything he had ever seen, and the human voice had been so calm, so confident, as if the speaker knew something that the Empire did not. The distortion continued to expand, and deep in the darkness of twisted space, something vast began to take shape. The laughter on Imperial bridges died as if someone had cut the power to every ship in the fleet. What had started as a minor spatial distortion near Jupiter was growing into something that defied every law of physics the Zephyrians understood. Space itself was tearing open like fabric, revealing a darkness deeper than the void between stars. Admiral Vextar stared at his sensor displays in growing disbelief. The readings made no sense. The distortion was now over 50,000 kilometers across and still expanding. Energy readings were off the charts, but his instruments couldn't identify the source. It was as if something impossibly massive was trying to force its way into normal space from somewhere else entirely. "Sir," his science officer called out, her voice tight with confusion. "The dimensional readings are impossible. Whatever is creating this distortion would require the power output of an entire star. No known technology can manipulate space-time on this scale." Vextar's tactical officer looked up from his displays, his usual confidence replaced by something that might have been fear. "Admiral, the distortion is affecting our sensors. We're getting interference across all frequencies, some kind of exotic radiation that our shields can't completely block." Around the bridge, crew members who had been joking moments before now worked in tense silence. The easy confidence of inevitable victory was fading, replaced by the first stirrings of uncertainty. This was not how the conquest of a primitive species was supposed to go. Fleet Admiral Zekthara's voice crackled over the communication system, static making his words hard to understand. "All ships maintain formation. Science Division reports this is likely some kind of experimental defensive system. Continue advance toward the human homeworld." But even Zekthara's voice carried a note of doubt that hadn't been there before. The spatial distortion was unlike anything in Imperial records. Their most advanced scientists were struggling to understand what they were seeing. The distortion continued to grow, and now something was becoming visible within the twisted space. At first it looked like a shadow, a darkness even deeper than the surrounding void, but as Vextar watched, the shadow began to take on definition and shape. "By the void," whispered his sensor officer. "Something is coming through." The something was massive. Not just large, but massive on a scale that dwarfed even the Eternal Dominion. As the spatial distortion began to stabilize, the true size of what was emerging became clear. The Zephyrian flagship was 8 kilometers long and had been the largest warship ever built by the Empire. What was coming through the dimensional rift was nearly twice that size. "Sensor reading confirms a vessel," reported the tactical officer, his voice barely steady. "Length approximately 15 kilometers. Width approximately 4 kilometers. Mass readings are—" He paused, checking his instruments again. "Mass readings are impossible, sir. This thing is built like a solid block of metal." The human vessel continued to emerge from what Vextar was beginning to realize was some kind of faster-than-light drive system unlike anything the Empire had ever encountered. The ship's hull was angular and predatory, covered in armor plating that looked thick enough to stop planetary bombardment weapons. Weapon emplacements lined its sides like the spines of some ancient war beast. But it was not just the size that was shocking. It was the design. This was not the crude construction of a primitive species learning to build spaceships. This was the work of engineers who had spent centuries perfecting the art of war. Every line, every angle, every surface spoke of deadly purpose and battlefield experience. "Communications incoming," announced his communications officer. The woman's voice was shaking slightly. "It's the same human as before." Captain Sarah Chen's voice filled the bridge again, still calm and measured despite the massive warship that had just torn its way out of folded space-time. "This is Captain Chen of the UNSC Retribution. Your 30 seconds are up. Last chance, Admiral. Leave now or we'll send you home in pieces small enough to fit in a cargo pod." Vextar felt something cold settle in his stomach. The human ship was huge, yes, but the Empire had numbers. 200 ships against one, no matter how large, should still be an easy victory. But there was something about the calm confidence in the human captain's voice that suggested she knew something he did not. "Admiral," called his tactical officer urgently, "we're detecting massive energy signatures from the human vessel. Their power output is several times greater than our entire fleet combined." That was impossible. No single ship could generate that much power. But the sensor readings were clear and consistent across all Imperial vessels. Whatever power source the humans were using, it was far beyond anything the Empire had ever developed. Vextar looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by something he had never seen in Zephyrian warriors before. Doubt. Fear. The realization that they might not be facing the primitive enemy they had expected. "Sir," his weapons officer called out. "The human vessel is moving. It's heading directly toward our formation." On the main display, the UNSC Retribution was indeed moving, but not in the desperate evasive patterns that characterized inferior ships facing superior numbers. It was moving like a predator that had spotted prey. Its course was direct and purposeful, aimed at the heart of the Imperial formation. "Fleet Admiral Zekthara is requesting orders," reported the communications officer. Vextar stared at the massive human warship growing larger on his display. Everything about this situation was wrong. The humans should have been fleeing or surrendering. They should not have been able to build ships this large. They should not have possessed technology that could tear holes in space-time. But pride was a powerful force, and the Empire had built its reputation on never backing down from any enemy, no matter how unexpected. 400 conquered worlds testified to the effectiveness of Imperial doctrine. Overwhelming firepower had solved every problem the Empire had ever faced. "Signal the fleet," Vextar ordered, his voice steady despite the growing knot of uncertainty in his chest. "All ships prepare for combat. Target the human vessel and prepare to fire on my command." His tactical officer looked up from his displays. "Sir, should we demand their surrender first?" "It's standard protocol." Vextar looked at the human ship again. It was still approaching, showing no signs of slowing or changing course. Whatever the humans were planning, they clearly had no intention of surrendering. "No," he said finally. "Something is very wrong here. We end this now before it gets worse. All ships open fire." He spoke the words with the authority of 4 centuries of Imperial victory, but deep in his mind a small voice was whispering that perhaps, for the first time in the Empire's long history, they had finally encountered something they could not simply overwhelm. The massive human warship continued its approach, and space around it seemed to shimmer with barely contained energy. Whatever was about to happen, Vexitar had the sudden, terrible feeling that the galaxy was about to change forever. Admiral Vextar's command echoed across 200 Imperial warships. The response was immediate and devastating. The combined firepower of the Empire's finest fleet erupted in a display of destruction that could have shattered moons and boiled oceans. Plasma cannons that burned hotter than stars sent streams of superheated matter racing toward the human vessel. Particle beam arrays unleashed focused energy that could cut through planetary crust. Quantum torpedoes, each one carrying the explosive power of a small nuclear weapon, streaked through space in perfect formation. The barrage was enough to destroy entire battle fleets. It was the concentrated might of an empire that had conquered 400 worlds, all focused on a single target. The weapons fire lit up the darkness of space like a new sun being born. But the UNSC Retribution did not slow down. The human warship's shields flared to life as the Imperial weapons struck. But these were not the crude energy barriers that the Empire's intelligence reports had described. These shields were sophisticated deflection systems that bent and redirected energy rather than simply absorbing it. Plasma beams that should have melted through any armor were scattered harmlessly into space. Particle streams powerful enough to crack asteroids were turned aside like rain hitting a window. "Impossible," breathed Vextar's weapons officer. "Nothing should be able to deflect that much firepower." The quantum torpedoes reached the human ship, their AI guidance system seeking weak points in the vessel's defenses. But the Retribution's point defense network came alive with a speed that made Imperial systems look ancient. Hundreds of small weapons turrets tracked the incoming missiles with inhuman precision, firing streams of projectiles that moved faster than Zephyrian sensors could follow. Every torpedo was intercepted and destroyed before it could reach the hull. "Their defensive systems are responding faster than our targeting computers can lock on," reported the tactical officer, his voice tight with disbelief. "It's like they're predicting where our weapons will be before we fire them." The human ship continued its advance through the Imperial formation, seemingly untouched by weapons that had leveled civilizations. Worse yet, it was accelerating. The massive vessel was picking up speed as it plowed through the Zephyrian fleet, like a predator moving through a school of fish. Fleet Admiral Zekthara's voice crackled over the communication system, static and panic making his words hard to understand. "All ships continue firing. Concentrate all weapons on their engines. Something that large can't be as maneuverable as our ships." But even as the order went out, the human warship was proving just how wrong that assumption was. Despite its massive size, the Retribution moved with a grace that defied physics. It rolled and twisted through space, avoiding the heaviest concentrations of fire while never slowing its advance toward the heart of the Imperial formation. Then, the human ship began to return fire. The first sign was a series of bright flashes along the Retribution's hull as weapon ports opened. What followed was unlike anything in Imperial military doctrine. Instead of energy weapons, the human ship fired physical projectiles. But these were not primitive chemical rockets or simple kinetic weapons. These were magnetic accelerator cannon rounds, tungsten slugs accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. The first Mac round struck the Imperial cruiser Stellar Pride amidships. The tungsten projectile, traveling at nearly 30,000 kilometers per second, punched through the cruiser's shields as if they weren't there. It tore through armor plating that had been designed to stop planet-killing weapons, passed completely through the ship's hull, and emerged from the other side in a spray of superheated metal and atmosphere. The Stellar Pride simply came apart. One moment it was a kilometer-long warship with a crew of 3,000. The next moment it was an expanding cloud of debris and flash-frozen air. Direct hit on Stellar Pride, came a shocked report from the communications officer. She's gone, sir. Completely destroyed. But the human ship was not firing single shots. The Retribution's Mac batteries opened up in full salvos, sending dozens of projectiles racing toward Imperial targets. Each round carried the kinetic energy of a small nuclear weapon, and the human ship was firing them as fast as Imperial vessels could fire their plasma cannons. The destroyer Void Hunter tried to evade an incoming Mac round, its captain throwing the ship into a desperate spiral. But the tungsten slug was too fast and the destroyer too slow. The projectile clipped the ship's rear section, tearing away the engine compartment and leaving the vessel spinning helplessly through space. The battlecruiser Iron Talon attempted to use its heaviest armor to absorb a Mac round impact. The tungsten slug struck the ship's forward armor plating and kept going, punching through meter-thick metal as if it were paper. The projectile destroyed the bridge, the main reactor, and the primary weapons array before exiting through the rear hull. "Iron Talon is down," reported the tactical officer, his voice barely a whisper. "Engines dead, weapons offline, massive hull breaches throughout the ship." But the Mac cannons were not the only weapons the human ship was using. Plasma torpedo batteries along the Retribution's sides began firing, sending guided warheads racing toward Imperial targets. But these were not simple explosive devices. These were smart weapons, their AI guidance systems adapting to each target's defensive systems in real time. The Imperial frigate Star Saber tried to use its electronic warfare suite to confuse an incoming plasma torpedo. The weapon's guidance system analyzed the jamming signals adapted to them and struck the frigate's reactor compartment with surgical precision. The resulting explosion tore the ship in half. The light cruiser Cosmic Storm deployed chaff and flares to throw off another torpedo's targeting system. The weapon ignored the decoys completely, having already analyzed the cruiser's heat signature and identified the most vulnerable target points. It struck the ship's magazine, causing a chain reaction that destroyed the vessel from the inside out. Admiral Vextar watched in growing horror as his fleet was systematically dismantled by a single enemy ship. The careful formations that had intimidated hundreds of species were being torn apart. Ships that had served the Empire for centuries were being reduced to drifting wrecks in a matter of minutes. "All ships, fall back and regroup," he ordered, his voice cracking slightly. "Concentrate fire on their weapon systems," but it was already too late. The human warship had torn through the center of the Imperial formation and was now among the support vessels. Troop transports and supply ships never designed for frontline combat were being destroyed with casual efficiency. The Retribution was not just winning a battle. It was conducting a massacre. "Sir," called his communications officer, "we're receiving distress calls from across the fleet. 15 ships destroyed, 37 heavily damaged, and the human vessel shows no signs of slowing down." Vexitar looked at his tactical display and felt something he had never experienced before in his long military career. The cold, paralyzing grip of absolute defeat. His fleet, the pride of the Empire, was being destroyed by a single enemy ship. Everything he had believed about Imperial superiority, about Zephyrian military might, about the natural order of the galaxy, was burning around him in the darkness of space. The human warship continued its deadly work, and space filled with the wreckage of Imperial dreams. The silence that followed was deafening. Where once the proud Imperial fleet had filled space with its mighty presence, now only debris and the dying echoes of distress signals remained. 73 ships had been destroyed outright. Another 112 were so heavily damaged they could barely maintain life support. Only 25 vessels remained combat-capable, and most of those were already charging their hyperspace drives for immediate retreat. Admiral Vextar stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, staring at the tactical display that showed the scattered remains of his fleet. His flagship had survived only because the human warship had seemingly ignored it, focusing instead on the vessels that posed the greatest threat. Now the Retribution hung motionless in space, its weapon system still active but no longer firing. The massive human vessel had barely taken any damage, a few scorch marks on its armor plating where the heaviest Imperial weapons had struck, some minor scarring where debris from destroyed ships had impacted its hull, but nothing that could be called significant damage. Nothing that suggested the Empire had been anything more than a minor annoyance. "Admiral," his communications officer called out, her voice shaking. "We're receiving a transmission from the human vessel. It's being broadcast on all frequencies." Vextar nodded numbly. He had expected this. The humans would demand surrender now, just as the Empire always did after demonstrating overwhelming force. It was the natural way of things. The strong ruled the weak. "Put it through," he ordered. Captain Sarah Chen's voice filled the bridge, still calm and measured despite the destruction her ship had just caused. "This is Captain Chen of the UNSC Retribution. I am transmitting this message to all surviving Imperial vessels and to your home fleet monitoring stations. Consider this humanity's formal introduction to the galaxy." The transmission included data streams that Vextar's computers automatically began to decode, technical specifications, strategic assessments, and something that made his blood turn to ice in his veins. Video recordings of other human warships, hundreds of them. Vessels just as large and deadly as the Retribution, engaged in what appeared to be routine training exercises. "Your Empire calls itself Apex Predators," Captain Chen continued. "You pride yourselves on 4 centuries of conquest, on the subjugation of 400 worlds. But you have been hunting prey animals, Admiral, weak species that could not defend themselves. You have grown fat and lazy, winning battles through overwhelming numbers against opponents who never had a real chance to fight back." The data streams continued to flow, showing human military installations that dwarfed anything in Imperial space, shipyards that could construct vessels like the Retribution by the dozen, training facilities where human soldiers practiced with weapons that made Imperial equipment look primitive. "We are not prey animals," the human captain said. "We are the result of 10,000 years of warfare. Every advance in our technology came from the need to fight and survive. Every improvement in our tactics came from facing enemies who wanted to destroy us completely. We are what happens when a species refuses to surrender, refuses to submit, and chooses to fight no matter what the odds." Vextar felt his legs giving out and had to grip his command chair to remain standing. The intelligence reports had been wrong. Not just incorrect, but catastrophically, impossibly wrong. Humanity was not a primitive species stumbling into space. They were something far more dangerous. "Your empire expanded by conquering the weak," Captain Chen continued. "We evolved by defeating the strong. Your warriors trained by dominating helpless opponents. Our soldiers earned their skills fighting for survival against enemies that showed no mercy. You built your fleet to intimidate inferior species. We built ours to win wars against equals. The data transmission showed human history in brief, brutal flashes. Wars between nations that had lasted for decades. Conflicts fought with weapons that could level cities. Military strategies developed through centuries of studying how to defeat opponents with equivalent technology and training. This was not a species that had stumbled into space travel. This was a species that had weaponized space travel. The age of easy Imperial expansion is over, Captain Chen announced. You picked the wrong species to underestimate. We have been watching you for 20 years, studying your tactics, learning your weaknesses. We know about every major fleet base, every important world, every key leader in your empire. The transmission shifted to show tactical analyses of Imperial military doctrine, pointing out flaws and weaknesses that Vextar had never even considered. Discussions of how Zephyrian formation fighting could be countered. Assessments of Imperial weapon systems and their limitations. battle plans for fighting the entire empire simultaneously. You came here expecting to find frightened primitives begging for mercy, the human captain said. Instead, you found something your empire has never encountered before. An enemy that is not afraid of you. An enemy that has been preparing for this fight longer than your current fleet has existed. An enemy that sees your arrival not as a conquest but as an opportunity. Vexitar's tactical officer looked up from his displays, his face pale with shock. Sir, the data they're transmitting includes detailed intelligence on our home fleet positions, ship movements from last week, strategic plans that are classified at the highest levels. They know everything about us. The magnitude of the disaster was becoming clear. Humanity had not just defeated the Imperial fleet. They had been watching and planning for decades, preparing for the day when the Empire would come calling. This entire battle had been a trap, and the Empire had walked into it with complete confidence. Your move, Admiral, Captain Chen concluded. You can retreat to your home systems and spread the word about what you found here. Tell your leaders that humanity is not interested in conquest or submission. We are interested in being left alone. Continue to expand in other directions if you wish, but this system and the space around it now belongs to us. The transmission ended with coordinates, not of Earth or any human world, but of the Imperial capital itself, a clear message that the humans knew exactly where to find the heart of the Empire if they chose to. Admiral, whispered his communications officer. Orders? Vextar looked around his ruined bridge at the faces of his surviving crew. These were warriors who had never known defeat. Soldiers who had believed in Imperial invincibility their entire lives. Now they stared back at him with the hollow eyes of those who had seen their entire worldview shattered in the space of a few hours. Signal the surviving ships, he said finally. We're going home. As the remnants of the Imperial fleet activated their hyperspace drives and fled towards Ephirian space, the human warship Retribution remained motionless among the debris of their defeat, watching, waiting, ready to send another message if the Empire chose not to listen to the first one. The age of uncontested Imperial expansion was over. Humanity had arrived on the galactic stage, and the galaxy would never be the same again. In the cold darkness of space, surrounded by the wreckage of Imperial pride, a new chapter in galactic history had begun, and it started with the simple truth that sometimes, when you reach into the void expecting to find prey, you discover that the void reaches back.